Hello everyone, RadLad here, and welcome back to yet another video. And today, we'll be talking about Metroid for the 4th time in a row. And this time around, it's about a Metroid 1 ROM hack by the name of Metroid Rogue Dawn. Metroid Rogue Dawn is one of the most highly regarded Metroid 1 ROM hacks of all time. And it was originally released in January of 2017 and was created by Grimlock and his small team consisting of the composer, Optomon, and the lead programmer, Snarfblam. This game was brought to my attention by a commenter on one of my Metroid Planets videos, and it got me curious to check it out. I had literally no idea what to expect from it since the only thing I knew about the game was the short info blurb that explained the basic plot on the downloads page for it. Therefore, I had no real expectations for whatever the game had in store. But enough with the intro, let's talk about the game itself. Metroid Rogue Dawn serves as a prequel to the original Metroid, and it shows us the events of how the Space Pirates obtained the first Metroid that would later be cloned by Mother Brain on Zebes. Which means that instead of playing as the titular heroine of Samus, you'll actually be playing as a space pirate, which is a really cool twist. However, there's more to that twist, as you won't be playing as any ordinary space pirate. Rather, you'll be playing as Ridley's best-kept secret, a human girl that he kidnapped from a planet that he raided in the past. Rather than killing this girl outright, he trained her to be a secret weapon that would be dispatched to a top-secret space pirate mission. Oh, and if this twist wasn't twisted enough, her name is Dawn Aron. As Dawn, you'll be exploring SR-388 with the intention of stealing an unknown specimen that has been captured by the Federation on the planet. The specimen, of course, being the Metroid. And yeah, that's about it. It's an interesting premise for sure, but it definitely raises a number of questions and potential plot holes. But hey, it's a fan game, so who really cares if some things don't add up perfectly? Being a ROM hack of Metroid 1, the game's controls are identical to the original, which is not exactly a good thing. There are many problems with Metroid 1's controls, such as the incredibly limited shooting angles, and that most of the enemies don't account for that well. There is also the problem that the jumping feels awkward and overly floaty, which makes platforming a much harder challenge than it should be. The controls are made even worse with Metroid 1's signature lag, as it was very poorly optimized when it was first released on the Nintendo Entertainment System. And yeah, whenever anything is happening on screen, expect a little bit of slowdown to ruin your day. Included in this lag is also input lag, which is very frustrating for a game like Metroid. That being said, Rogue Dawn still has plenty of enhancements of its own, the most obvious of which being the map system, though it is far from being perfect. For one, it's entirely filled out from the start, which sounds cool, but there's no way to tell where you have and haven't been, as the colors don't change if you've been there or not. It also doesn't indicate where missile or energy tanks are, since only the major upgrades are indicated on the map by a simple dot, meaning that you can't even tell if you've gotten that upgrade or not. It's all about memory. Speaking of major upgrades, most of them are returning upgrades from Metroid 1, though many of them have been tweaked quite a bit, either nerfing or buffing them from how they once worked. The long beam is the same as it's always been, with the only difference being that you actually start off with it this time around, which is honestly very nice. Dawn also starts off with the Morph Ball, which can now activate in mid-air, a feature that did not debut until Super Metroid. I honestly didn't even notice this was new at first, because it just felt so natural. Although for some reason, the Morph Ball seems a lot more bouncy when it hits the ground after a fall, which is a tad bit annoying, as it can lead you right into another enemy attack. The high jump boots work exactly the same as they did in the original, and still increase your jump height by the same amount. The screw attack is also the exact same, and it's as satisfying as ever to absolutely annihilate everything in your path with a somersaulting jump of death and destruction. The Morph Ball bombs are also back, but they feel very wonky. They seem to launch the Morph Ball with more momentum than they used to, and combined with the overly bouncy Morph Ball, makes the entire form kind of obnoxious to use at times. Metroid 1's Morph Ball bombs are also designed in a way where infinite bomb jumping is impossible, so they aren't as versatile as the bombs seen in later games. The Varia suit grants Dawn a 50% defense boost against all enemy attacks, and also slightly changes the color of her sprite. The Ice Beam works identically to how it did in Metroid 1, letting you freeze enemy in place and use them as platforms to get to higher areas. The Wave Beam has received the most amount of changes of any of the returning upgrades, but most of them are nerfs to the upgrade. In Metroid 1, it's arguably the best item in the game as it curves your beam into an arc, allowing you to hit enemies on the ground while also having a faster fire rate. Though in Rogue Dawn, the Wave Beam no longer passes through walls like it did in Metroid 1, which is kind of lame. This item honestly makes the player feel like a powerhouse against normal enemies, and makes the game a hell of a lot more manageable once you get it. Now those are just the upgrades that were already in Metroid 1, but Rogue Dawn features 2 new upgrades that were never featured in the original game, and both are incredibly well implemented and fun to use. The first of which being the Spring Ball, an item that originally debuted in Metroid 2. It allows Samus to jump in her Morph Ball form. It's more of a quality of life upgrade compared to being mandatory, since infinite bomb jumping can allow you to go just as high, if not higher than the Spring Ball normally. Though, since Rogue Dawn does not have infinite bomb jumping, the Spring Ball sees a lot more use, and feels very natural in the game's style. Even cooler than that is the Wall Jump upgrade. Though Wall Jump was never an additional upgrade in the Metroid games, as it was an advanced skill that Samus had access to from the get-go. Dawn, on the other hand, needs an upgrade to replicate that skill, but honestly the Wall Jump here feels better than it does in any official 2D game. It's responsive, quick, and snappy. Plus, like in Super Metroid and Zero Mission, you can do one-sided wall jumps to allow for some cool skips. This is definitely my favorite upgrade in the game, and it's honestly amazing how well they managed to implement this feature into Metroid 1. It fits in seamlessly. The entire presentation of Rogue Dawn is a massive step up from the original game, and resembles the look of a late NES game released in the 90s. All the areas are vastly different, and it's easy to tell them apart. And they each have their own tile sets, platforms, enemies, and design conventions to help them stick out. The sprite work of the game is also phenomenal, and while the enemies are usually simple retextures of pre-existing enemies, they still look great and fit perfectly with the game's style. Some are so well done that it may be hard to even tell what enemy they were originally replacing. And Dawn's sprites are also very well done, and I love the detail that she only wears the helmet of her suit when it's an area with unbreathable atmosphere. There's also more advanced terrain that makes rooms look far more interesting than ever before. With slopes, curves, and other formations, this makes the terrain of the planet feel more organic than the super blocky artificial feel of the original Zebes. The more varied terrain also makes it much easier to hit enemies located on the ground, which partially fixes the issues of enemies always being too low to hit with the standard beam weapon. The only thing that's not really improved graphically from the original is the backgrounds, as they still mostly consist of a solid black color. Although some areas have a little bit more going on with it, but it's never anything as major as something like Enigma in Metroid Planets. As mentioned in the story, the game takes place on SR-388. Though you wouldn't really be able to tell that unless the game told you directly, considering the map layout is completely different than Metroid 2's version of the planet. The planet is now split into 7 distinct areas of varying size, the first of which being the Space Pirate dropship, which acts as a sort of hub for accessing the other areas in the game. You start off by only being able to access one area of the planet, but as you collect more upgrades, you'll be able to explore more and more of the other parts of the ship that'll lead to more areas to explore. Though, the only problem with this way of progression is that you must backtrack out of the deepest depths of the area you're in, and back through the ship in order to get to a different area. Though like in the actual Metroid 1, if you die, you won't actually lose any of the items you collected, and dying can act as a shortcut to get back to the ship far more quickly. The ship also serves as the location for where the missiles can first be obtained, as well as where the screw attack and ice beam are located later on. Most of the ship is free from enemies, except for the two sections that lead over to the main areas of the map. To the left is the main core, which is filled with bouncing plasma enemies and platforms heated with plasma that damage Dawn upon contact. To the top right is the biological weapons vault, which is basically a long hallway filled with enemies with secret paths along the way. The surface of SR-388 can be accessed via two elevators on the lowest parts of the dropship, although the left elevator really only leads to a single missile tank, since you can't explore anywhere else over there until you have morph ball bombs. The right elevator is the main gateway for accessing the surface, and this area is kind of split into two different sub-areas, as half of the area is underwater where the physics are made way floatier, which also makes this submerged section an absolute pain in the ass to go through. The reason I consider the submerged part to be a separate region of the map is literally only because the music changes here. Honestly, this first area doesn't exactly give a great first impression about what to expect from the rest of the hack. The entire area, aside from the few rooms with this purple liquid, are made up of varying shades of gray, which isn't helped by the fact that Dawn's primary color is also gray. So the entire first part of the game looks like it's running on a Game Boy Pocket. It also doesn't help that this boring looking area is also the biggest in the game, meaning you'll be here for a while. There are no bosses to be fought here, but there are 3 upgrades to collect, being the morph ball bombs, which are very much needed for progression, the high jump boots, which don't feel as impactful at first, since you first get them in the super floaty submerged section, and the wall jump boots, which, as I mentioned before, are incredibly satisfying to utilize and are by far the best upgrade in the game. This area also branches off into an elevator that leads to the crashed Galactic Federation ship. The crashed Federation ship is the same one where the space pirates first detected the Metroid specimen. The ship is desolate, with only robotic reskins of existing enemies roaming its empty corridors. The central shaft of the ship has multiple doors leading to other areas of the ship, but most have powered down, making them impossible to get through. Which is sad, so many poor doors that will never be able to be reopened. Truly my worst nightmare. Though not all hope is lost, as some doors still have power and can be opened like normal, and some of the powerless doors are actually made up of shootable blocks in disguise to appear like a normal door. What trickery is this? There's also some cracked blocks throughout the ship that can be broken to grant access to what I can only assume are the vent systems. These vent systems serve as the way to obtain the only upgrade found in the area, being the wave beam. The vent areas have surges of electricity covering the floors, which will damage Dawn greatly if she happens to fall into them. These vents also lead into the boss area, and it's fucking horrible. The boss appears to be a Galactic Federation trooper piloting a weird pogo stick machine that shoots out spiky projectiles that go in a wave pattern. This is obviously just a sprite swap of Ridley, but it has enough changes in its design and arena to make it feel somewhat unique. However, those changes make the fight 10 times worse than Ridley's ever was. Ridley's was pathetically simple, and all you really had to do was just spam the missile button, dodge some fireballs every once in a while, and then bam, you win. The Pogo Troopers fight is about the same, except instead of lava being the obstacle under the main platform, it's the electricity hazard. And there's also a bouncing energy core enemy that travels around the room that can be killed and infinite respawn for pickups. Now that doesn't sound all that bad, and it wouldn't be, if it wasn't for the horrendous lag. This fight is unbearable because of it. Dodging the spike balls is an exercise in pain because the jumping physics are so wonky when it's lagging, not to mention the sheer amount of input lag making reacting to obstacles an impossibility. But the worst part is that the knockback is stupidly amplified by the lag, which means you'll tumble down into the electrical hazard over and over again and take extra damage from it because of the stupid input lag. This fight went horribly from me, and it was partially my fault since I definitely didn't have as many upgrades as I should have probably had. But even with the upgrades, this fight still isn't good. Either you hope you get lucky with the fireballs, or grind out upgrades and just tank all the hits. Upon finishing the battle, you'll find a couple Federation troopers who tell you that they killed their Metroid specimen, and that the only way to get a new one is to find a Metroid nest and kill an Alpha Metroid to get the right cellular specimen. However, the Metroid habitat is blocked by 2 access keys, which are collected after beating the Pogo Trooper and another boss somewhere else hidden on the map. The next major area of the game is accessed through the main core of the pirate dropship. The area is a cavernous forest that gives me serious Brinstar Green vibes. There are flower platforms held up by vines, tall trees that Screes use as perches that can also be jumped on like normal platforms. However, only some parts of the area have vegetation growing, as a lot of the areas far from the center have a golden brown color. These areas are also home to deadlier enemies, but hold better rewards to counteract that. This area's only major upgrade is the Varia suit, which is definitely needed here since the enemies do double the damage compared to the ones on the surface. To the south of this area is a maze made up of morph ball tunnels, and if you make your way through it, you'll end up in the Chozo ruins. The intro area has raindrops in the background that splatter when they hit the ground. There's also vines and other overgrowth that serve to make the area honestly look pretty visually stunning for an NES game. Some of the vines even make up platforms or these really annoying spikewell plants that make maneuvering your way through the first segment of the area a little more challenging. Once you arrive in the central ruins, you'll see engravings of Metroids and loads of Chozo statues, showing clearly that the Chozo were responsible for the creation of the species. Though this area is very confusing to explore, as it makes heavy use of room wrapping. This means certain rooms will link back to each other even if they aren't directly connected to another on the map. All the other sections of the planet have the same mechanic, but none of them do it nearly as much as this area does. Just figuring out how to make progress proves to be an interesting puzzle in of itself. You really have to examine every little detail for a potential opening for a path forward. This process is made even more interesting by the fact that some platforms, like these pillars for example, are actually passed through. Once you finally solve the main room's puzzle, the path to the boss will be basically a semi-straight shot. Also, ironically, despite the number of Chozo statues here, there are no major upgrades to collect. The boss of this area is this bizarre porcupine crab thing that's just a reskin of Kraid. The arena consists of ground on the left and some ground on the right where the porcupine thing is perched, with a giant spike pit in between. When I fought this boss, I was fully loaded up on upgrades, so it was a breeze compared to the Pogo Trooper. But even then, it's still not great and the lag is just as painful to deal with. If I didn't have the Ice Beam, I'd probably be having a nightmarish time attempting to dodge the flying claws and chest spikes the boss chucks out every fucking 2 seconds. Upon defeating this boss, you'll come face to face with the remains of a Federation research team. In their desperation, they'll give you the access code even though you are a space pirate. There is also an energy tank that they're using as their only hope for survival. Too bad it's mine now! Ha 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 ha! Even with the second access code collected, there's still one other area that can be explored before the nest. After getting through the biological weapons vault of the space pirate dropship, you'll take an elevator down to the volcanic area of the planet. The ground here is tinted orange with the heat, and dried up bones lay everywhere, and there are spiky protrusions from every surface that will damage you if you come into contact with them. And, of course, as you go deeper through the area, you'll come face to face with lava pools. The area is also claustrophobic as all hell, and you'll have to explore most of the tunnels in morph ball form. This area really only has 2 main points of interest, however, first of which being the Spring Ball, which lies in the deepest depths of the planet. But the more important landmark of this area is the facility at the top, which leads into the Metroid nest. The 2 access codes that you collected will create a bridge in the first room that takes you to a random boss fight. Now, This boss fight is actually really awesome. This boss is entirely custom and is not based on anything in the original Metroid. The boss consists of a central core with 2 spike balls connected to it via some kind of stretchy cord-like substance. Now this boss, which I'll call the Spike Sweeper for convenience, attacks by flying around the room and swinging its spike balls towards Dawn. And the range that it can attack with these spike balls is literally anywhere in the room, so you'll have to be constantly moving and weaving your way through the enemy's attacks. Parts of the floor below are also made of a weak material that can be destroyed by the Spike Sweeper's spike balls, which will reveal the lava below. The Spike Sweeper can only be damaged by directly shooting its core, but the thing that makes this fight really enjoyable is that there's barely any lag, which means you can actually control Dawn and avoid the attacks of the boss without insane amount of input lag. Who would have thought? This means that this is the first boss in the entire game that you don't need to tank every hit for, since you can actually skillfully dodge all of its attacks. Makes me wish the other 2 bosses were custom as well, because clearly the Rogue Dawn team can make a really good boss fight. After the Spike Sweeper is vanquished, you'll finally be able to enter the Metroid Nest. The nest is a long linear shot to the Alpha Metroid, and it also has the prettiest visuals of any area in the entire game. This area just feels very alien, as nothing is even comparable to Earth in this section of the planet. However, my praises for this area end here. This area is so fucking long. Getting through this area takes about 15 to 20 minutes, and along the entire path, you have to fight Metroid after Metroid, and they just never stop coming! It also doesn't help that the terrain itself is fighting against you the entire time. There's cramped passages, morph ball tunnels that lead straight into the jaws of a Metroid, and these stupid weird flower plants that will damage Dawn by quite a bit if she comes into contact with one. Oh, and there's also these obnoxious mini Metroids that are in the background for some reason that shoot these red projectiles that deal a ton of damage. And there's no way to kill those guys, so you'll just continue to get bombarded by them. At the end of this hellscape is the final boss of Metroid Rogue Dawn, the Alpha Metroid, which is apparently the source of the Metroids, which makes no sense considering Queen Metroids are the source of Alphas, and Alpha Metroids already exist as the first evolution of a Metroid, so this Alpha Metroid is a phony! Regardless of what it's called, the Alpha Metroid is literally just a reskinned Mother Brain fight, and the developers did something quite impressive with it. They somehow managed to make the fight 10 times worse than the original. Mother Brain was already a pain in the ass to begin with, but now you have to be at a specific height to hit the stupid Metroid, since there's no platform that matches the creature's weak point. But you also have to dodge the Rinkas, which are those dumb ring enemies that fly around non-stop, which will always get in the way of everything. There's also the background Metroids that send the red projectiles at you at the worst possible angles. Oh, and if that wasn't enough, there's also the part where you have to deal with infinite spawning Metroids. So that's really cool. Now, this fight would be obnoxious already, but it's made borderline unplayable because of the overwhelming amounts of lag. Your jumps are delayed, your shots are delayed, and if you get hit once, you'll be sent flying backwards into another projectile. It's near impossible to actually dodge anything since you'll be fighting the frame rate more than the actual boss itself. The ideal strategy is to freeze a Metroid or Rinka at the perfect height where you can shoot the boss's weak point easily. However, you also have to freeze either the Metroid or the other Rinkas so they can't attack you while you're on one of them. Plus, you have to freeze at the right horizontal distance or else you'll be hit by one of the background Metroids. And if you do it too close, you'll be hit by this weird Metroid vine thing. This boss took me nearly 35 minutes to beat. And that was with abusing save states. because doing this boss without save states mean you have to go through the entirety of the Metroid nest all over again just to get another shot, which is fucking ridiculous. This boss is probably one of, if not the worst boss fight I've ever had the displeasure of fighting, and it was almost as painful as having to play Metroid Prime Hunters. Though at least it's only one bad fight and not the entire game. Fuck you, Metroid Prime Hunters, you're still a piece of shit. After you beat the Alpha Metroid, the escape sequence begins as the Federation has destroyed the Space Pirate dropship, so you must quickly find another ship to leave with. The escape sequence isn't really that interesting aside from the annoying fact that you have to deal with Metroids during the entire sequence. Once you escape, Dawn gives the Metroid specimen that she was literally never seen gathering, and gives it to Ridley. He then uses it on Zebes to create more Metroids with Mother Brain, which is obviously the events of the first Metroid game. However, Dawn decides to stop helping Ridley, cause a war with the Federation, and leaves to do her own thing in a different part of the galaxy. And it just so happens that at the same time she leaves, another spaceship enters Zebes, piloted by someone who shares Dawn's last name. Metroid Rogue Dawn is incredible on a technical level. The fact they were able to stuff so many advancements and new level elements is astounding. Visually, you'd have a hard time believing that it's still built on Metroid 1. However, it's the gameplay that reminds you that you're still playing the original game. The lag is honestly even worse than in Metroid 1 due to all the visual enhancements. And with the exception of the Spike Sweeper, the bosses are all tedious, annoying, laggy messes of fights where the only viable option is to just tank hits and get lucky with your shots. Rogue Dawn is definitely not a bad game, as most of its flaws are derivative of it being based on Metroid 1, which is a really shaky foundation to build upon. However, this game would be absolutely amazing if it was built on the Metroid Planets engine, since the controls would be better, the map and HUD elements would be improved, and most importantly, no more stupid lag. Even though Rogue Dawn has a lot of issues, especially in regards to the bosses, I'd still recommend that any Metroid fan at least try it out, as it does have a lot of things going for it, and I think it's worth sifting through the bad to reach the good of the game. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all in the next one.